Before we move on and look at performing function calls, let's review the components of a function definition again. A function definition always begins with the data type of the return value of the function, followed by the function name, which should be somewhat mnemonic and have some meaning to the purpose of the function, followed by the parameter list, which is the data that's going to be passed into the function. It can be one or more variables, for lack of a better term. They're really not called variables. Parameters is a better name. So we'll say that the parameter list can be one or several parameters, followed by an open curly brace to indicate the beginning of the function body. Then you have the function body itself, which can be one or more statements, whatever you need to perform the purpose of the function. And then the last part of the function body will be the return statement, which returns the value from the function back to the calling program. The example we looked at was a square function that returned an integer, so that's our first part of the definition, int, followed by the function name square, then open parenthesis to indicate the beginning of the parameter list. The only parameter to this function, which is number, and it's an integer. Then we'll open the function body, we'll put the curly brace on the same line, our standard way to write that syntax. Then we declared a variable called squared and defined it as being equal to number times number, the actual act of squaring the parameter. Then after we've computed that, all we have to do is return it and then close off the function. So there's our function definition for the square function. Let's go back and look at our code and code blocks again. So here's the function. The function definition always goes in the global area of a program, which is outside of int main. For practicality reasons, we're going to put it at the beginning, although it can go beneath int main. I'll show you later how to do that, but it's probably easier to work with it when it's on top. So now let's look at the main program and how the function's called. So we have a couple of variables, int number and squared. Squared is going to hold the number we entered. We haven't used it yet, but we will. Then we enter a number, then we get the number from the user, and then we write out the original number and then the squared number. The function call happens right here. So a function call will consist of the function name followed by what's called the argument or argument list, depending on if it's one or more arguments. A lot of times you'll just call it the argument list, even though it may be one argument, and there are some functions that will take no arguments. A function call argument list has to match the parameter list in both the data type and number of parameters being defined in the function definition. So if our function definition has one parameter and it's int, then in our function call, that argument has to match exactly. One integer variable being passed in as the parameter for the function. What happens is when the compiler gets to this part of the program where the function call is, it literally transfers control from the calling program to the function. The function's body is executed, and then the return value is returned in the very place where the function call is. That's why we say that a function call can be placed wherever an expression is required or expected. So for example, rather than have the function call in a cout statement, we could have called the function as the act of assigning its value to a variable, like this, and then written out the result, like so. Let's build and run that program just to make sure that it works correctly. We'll do 4 again. 4 squared is 16, and that writes it out, and so it's right. So the function call is a little bit easier to understand than the function definition, but there are some specific rules. Of course, the function call has to use the same name as the function, or else the compiler won't recognize it and consider it an undefined identifier or undeclared identifier. And then the argument that's passed in the function call has to match the parameter list both in data type and number, so that if there's one integer parameter, then the function call can only have one integer argument. If a function definition has 2 integer parameters, then a function call must also have 2 integer arguments being passed in when the function is called. Those are the only rules in function calls. So with this background, we're ready to move to the next video where we're going to look at some examples of some more complex functions.